want to take a seat, please help yourself to the refreshments provided by our Friends group. But we wanted to welcome you tonight. We have Dr. Stephen Underwood here. Sorry I'm not a local, so I know a little bit about him, but I'm sure he's going to tell you a lot more about himself. We have 4 novels now? 4 novels he's written. All are in our library collection, but they are also available to purchase at the back table with our Friends members, Susan and Mary and Kathy are here tonight. So if you'd like to have an autographed copy after you hear Dr. Underwood speak, please purchase a copy. We will, and he'll probably autograph anything up here, you don't have to just buy the book, but we're going to have a discussion, and then Dr. Underwood is going to open it up for questions and conversation, and then we'll do autographs afterward.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you very much for coming. We are Facebook Living it, so if you just want to watch it again later, it'll be on Facebook.
All right, first I want to thank all y'all for coming and on what's been kind of a misty afternoon here, and I appreciate it very much. I'm going to talk a little bit about how things got going, and then we'll go into Ghost Princess. When I was in college, I had a teacher. I took creative writing when I was my freshman year, hoping it would be too tough a class, and I had the usual tough classes like math and science in there before them. And the teacher's name was Ruth Hayden, and she was one of the best teachers I had in college. She really was. And I wrote a little short story about my dog and myself back when I lived in Charlotte, and how we got entangled with our next door neighbor who thought our dog was being too mean, and even though all he was doing was barking. But it was, she read it, and she read it with such a reflection voice that it said, well, maybe I can do something. And so I kind of got interested in writing. Then I became a history teacher, as some of you know, and that was years ago. And during that time, of course, I slowly worked on my doctorate and finally got it. And kind of goes back to the literary thing that we're having. My dissertation was the ideal teacher. And what I did was look at how teaching was looked at by the writing profession. How that played out, particularly since we've got several former teachers here, the way things were changing. And I used one fictional book and 2 nonfiction as my background of what some people consider the ideal teacher. Pat Conroy wrote a book called The Water is Wide, and then they made a movie out of it called Conrack. Jaime Escalante, who was Hispanic American, the movie about him was called Stand and Deliver. And it was very interesting, although then I later, as I was doing my research, found that Escalante could be kind of mean towards other folks and you didn't agree with it. But anyway, that's what happened. And last one, I don't know whether you would like it, but I'm sure the library probably has it, or did have it at least at one time. It's a mythic tale by John Updike, and it's called The Centaur. And the hero is considered to be Prometheus, and his father is one of the gods who's going to pass away, which is exactly what happens. But he's a teacher, and the fact he's trying to do that, he's one like a centaur, trying to teach others about it, made for a fascinating story that influenced me during that time. After I retired, I decided to write some, and I went to CCCC up in Pittsburgh, and I'm going to make my stand here. Hopefully none of you are from Chatham County. For some reason, the creative writing courses, almost in their entirety, ended up at Pittsburgh. There were very few taught down here, but Al and I, well, Al lives up that way, so that's right. met, and where we would go. And they were good, they were great teachers. Melissa Delbridge, Marjorie Hudson. Ruth Moose, did you ever have Ruth Moose? I didn't. I just knew her because she was special. You were, okay, very good. So, and again, it'd be nice if we could get more CCCC writing classes down here. My first book was C.W. Biggs, Country Detective, mainly from my writings that I've done for CCCC, and I put them together. I self-published that, and that was an interesting experience, doing that sort of thing. Don't advise against it, but it's you know, you've got to be willing to get, learn something about the publishing industry. Then came a decision to write a book that was called The Borrowed Princess, and it's back in the back also. The Borrowed Princess at one time was about 400 or so pages long, over 300. And it had a lot of this book in it. And I think, again, if any of you have tried to publish books, etc., you may know this fact. Publishers today, particularly the small ownership publishers, like to have you make a promise that you'll do 3 or 4 books instead of 1 book. So suddenly, my princess story, I said, well, maybe I could pull it off. Would develop into something else, and so I wrote it, divided it up. So a little bit of Ghost Princess was originally in The Borrowed Princess, but again, then I had to expand it out, and it worked out really, really well. And it's important to note this, because I think it makes a huge difference. Some of you know this work. The maps are by a former student of mine, Shannon McDonald. And he is very, very good at cartography. And he's an engineer up in Raleigh. He takes care of a lot of different projects up in Raleigh. And the drawings, again, Sanford situation, are by Judy Seidler, Hal Seidler's daughter, Boyette. And she has been very, very kind to do lots and lots of covers for this, and she's very good. She really did a nice cover on this one. I may get people buying this, not because of what I wrote in the book, but, that's how I do it. And I should mention, I'm a little bit excited that they were here, that one of the things I had in mind was that I would write books for my up-and-coming granddaughters. Now, they were a little bit, supposedly middle grade, but they're catching up. They're almost, middle grades upon them, right? So it was interesting to do that and think about, what would they like and what goes on from there. There is a book 3 and a book 4 in this because of the promise. Book 3 is starting, and it's going to be called The Twin Princesses, because the two are Orapundia and Orafundia. And Orafundia is no fun whatsoever, and Orapundia speaks constantly in what eventually comes to be named after her, puns. So it's going to have sort of a humorous kind of thing to it. Then we'll consider how that goes with the 4th book. That may come up after that. I want to talk again a little bit about, let's talk about the book now. In front of the book, there will be fairly close to the front of the book, there will be a map. And the map was my notion of what I wanted to do. Now, I wanted to write a book of fiction, mainly for middle grade kids, younger kids, maybe some older kids as they grew up a long time there. They would still have enough in it as I start getting it more and more mature into more and more things. And so then here comes a history teacher. I said, well, how do I want to make my map of the world like this? And I said, well, I don't want it exactly like this now. But again, if you look at the map, you'll see that it kind of looks a little bit like the eastern United States. Sticks out kind of like the Outer Banks, but it doesn't have an Outer Banks, it kind of sticks out some. Goes back up towards what we now call Canada, and you don't know what else goes up that way. And then it has mountains to the west, but this was important because I wanted to keep things down here, down in this area. They're the height of the Rocky Mountains rather than the Appalachians. And then I would have offended anybody. I got rid of Florida altogether. So it's here. So it's like the bottom of Georgia, that's it. And came up with some names. Now the other thing I did was I knew a lot of film, books, etc., had been done by the English, and I thought, or English settlers, things of that nature. I thought, what would happen if you went a different way? And so I tried to make it a bit more Scandinavian, with folks or characters who had either Scandinavian names, or they would say Biolus Pax or something, something that made some sense to them, things of that nature. Toss those in. And then I tossed in a couple other characters too. I have a native character, and she's called Toady. And Toady is a friend to my heroine, who's called Tick. Her real name's Campanulus, but they call her Tick because the first word she ever spoke was when her dad was reading a story and the clock behind him was going tick-tock. And she started going tick-tock, tick-tock. And the father started calling her Tick, and it stuck. She liked that a heck of a lot better than Campanulus, and I can understand. So Toady became her friend at an early age. And Toady was a princess, but nobody knew it, of a native tribe called the Malacoons. And she was small, and so people didn't pay much attention. Slowly but surely, not so much in the first. In the first book, she gets badly hurt by an attack by a black panther in the mountains, and but she survives it. And Tick is very worried about her through the rest of the book and into the first book, and then she sees her walking. She's been in a what amounts to what they call a wheelchair back then. She gets up and starts walking towards Tick, and so Tick is very, very excited about that. At the end of the book, in the first book, The Barred Princess, and I guess I should say this too, Tick thought she was going to be sent to get married, and which she had a friend of hers, where is he? Oh, did it to myself. His real name is Sir Edmund Hillary Slaughterblossom, but he's nicknamed Plover, so makes it nice and easy there. So Plover and Tick have a close to romantic relationship. It's kind of developing more and more, and in fact, that's what I'm going to be reading today is some of that. But he had accompanied her, and along with some other folks. They run into all sorts of stuff, and they ran into a political situation. The country they're from is Azerul, but the main country of this supposed redundant United States, American colony, excuse me, was Midlothian. Now my wife can tell you why I did that. Many, many years ago, on the Midlothian Turnpike in Richmond, we had an accident, and I loathed it completely. So that was my so Polaris is my northern continent, which makes sense since it's up towards the north. Cumbria is a little area off, like Northumberland or something like that in England. So they're still getting some English names and some stuff in there, but that's the things that they're kind of doing. But there are other things that I do, like there is a place where a lot of folks talk, stop as they head towards the frontier where the mountains are, and it's called White Castle. Can't figure out where I came up with that, but it serves all sorts of kind of foods. There's another place called Sylvania, like in Sylvania, and things of that nature. So all that sort of stuff is happening. So anyway, in book 1, Tick decides to go north and thinking she's going to get married, but Ghost, her sister, worries about her, and she sends the bravest and strongest of the daughters, of the sisters, up there. Her name is Paratamus, everybody calls her Amos, who dresses up, with a pretend mustache and sort of things like that. But Amos, once she becomes towards the feminine side, ends up marrying the guy that Tick thought she was going to marry. And so Tick comes back, which makes Plover very, very happy as we get to this part right here. So, questions from that part? Okay. Well, then I'm going to read this little bit, and everybody tell me if time's up or anything like that. And since I've been talking about Tick and Plover, the chapter's titled "At Long Last Love." Now, when all this is going on, they hear that Prince Amir is trying to force a marriage to Ghost, which is not her real name, but they calls her Ghost because she seemed to be able to disappear into the castle and nobody would find her. She is unbelievable at finding her way around there. However, the Tick and Plover hear that she has gone west, and so they kind of bypass it, not realizing she's down there. And so that leads to a really troublesome journey. And this is after they've been going and going towards what was called the Scrabble Rocks. They're getting really tired of this trip that they're having. So, with his broadsword, Plover cut a swath through another thicket of ice, working his way through the carved openings. "Tick," he called, "I can see the Scrabble Rocks." The sun baked the rocks red, but could not penetrate the catacomb of caves that dotted the hillsides. A worried princess asked Plover, "How far do you think we've come today?" Plover shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe perhaps 2, maybe 3 miles." She slumped down on a log. "That's all? All that work, we've only come 2 or 3 miles?" She pulled off a muddy boot and poured water onto the algae-ridden water. Plover walked over to put his hand on her shoulder. Seeing his dirty hand, he thought better of it and sat down on the log next to her. "Tick, it's not as bad as it sounds. We've sunk up to our hips in mud, cut our way through brambles, and been attacked by flesh-eating mosquitoes." This comment brought a smile to her, and she reached up to help shoo the bugs away. Plover pointed back to the thicket behind her. "And we've had to backtrack at least 4 times to avoid Veneer's man." Remember, Count Veneer's the bad guy. "I think we did all right." Tick picked up a pebble and rubbed it in her hand. "Yes, I guess that does make it sound a bit better." She tossed the rock, skipping across the water. "Maybe we should stop for the night, get a good night's sleep, and head out again in the morning." "I think that's a good idea, Tick. Let's move over to the other side of the pond." They slowly circled its edge. He pointed away from the sun. "We can start with a big cave there." Tick squinted her eyes. "But Plover, there's smoke coming out of there." Plover turned to her. "If someone were there, they would need a fire. They've left, or their fire would be burning brightly." "I see a small branch feeding the pond just to the left. It's running a bit faster than the others." He picked up 2 water jugs. "I'll see if I can fill this up with less brackish water than we had last night." She watched as he gingerly stepped up the slippery bank. "He's thinner than when we started this adventure," she thought. He pulled up a small sapling with one hand and used it to support his climb. "And stronger. His hair is longer, too." He pulled a pine cone burr out of it. She covered her mouth to avoid laughing. They had both matured, or at least she hoped they had. She continued to watch him. Do I admire him? Or she paused and then whispered, do I love him? There, I've said it, she thought, and with a sigh leaned over the pond bank and washed her face. Plover eased his way down the rivulet and checked the water in the jugs. It filled faster than expected. He looked back at the pond and noticed Tick washing off. He knew it was his imagination, but she seemed to get prettier every day, even unwashed. They'd grown to know each other so well. He often finished her sentences, and she would do the same for him. But did her heart match his? Yes, someday, he muttered as he shook his head and smiled. There, I've said it. He walked back. The ribbon-tied jug draped around his neck. It was her ribbon, he thought. Tick had moved to a log just below the cave and was stirring the algae in the water, making figure eights with her fingertips. Her motions gave the pond an aquamarine luminescence. Look, Clover, I've taken scummy water and made something beautiful. Clover laughed. You certainly have, Princess, pointing to the setting sun, he mused. However, I think the sun's rays may have a bit to do with that. She lifted her head and peered up at his face, and they made your eyes green. Taking the water jugs from around his neck, he sat down beside her. Ah, well, if my mother made that a feature, hand in that feature. Tick placed her hand on his cheek, and a very beautiful one. She moved in his arms, their lips met, held together with a longing, loving kiss, then met again and again. It is impossible to put in words a description of that moment. Imagine the most sincere, most delicate, most breathtaking kiss. Cherish it. Let it linger in your memory, and you will know the majesty of that kiss once more. And again, the lovers held each other as the sun set, giving rise to a sliver of moon. Tick leaned her head on Clover's shoulders and watched fireflies dart across the pond. For each one spotted, they traded a kiss. Tick lifted her head. I hope that's not a sign. Encompassed by a wreath of smoke, they encircled their heads, took flight, danced in the sighing wind. Tick lifted her head. I hope that's not a sigh of disappointment. I didn't sigh, replied Clover. That's another sign. A second wreath of smoke passed over their heads. Both turned back toward the cave and stared at the most wondrous and fearsome sight. There gleamed the massive golden eyes of a dragon. That is the most lovely moment I have witnessed in many years, said the great dragon. Clover and Tick drew their swords, but the dragon merely crossed his claws. The talons turned red in the last flickers of the setting sun, dulled by the gathering clouds. And the way you two fit together when you kiss, he sighed, another plume of smoke. It was just wonderful. It doesn't work for us, continued the dragon, touching his snout with his one claw. We just don't mesh like you humans. Anyway, sorry I interrupted. Don't mind me, but I just had to tell you your kiss was absolutely divine. Brought me to tears. I haven't cried like that since, let's see, he took his claw from his nose and scratched his head. Since dear Grandmama died, and that's been over 800 seasons. Stunned into silence, Tick finally responded, who are you and how do you know our language? Clover sat frozen and tightened his grip on Tick's hands. The dragon's visage changed. His snout and cheeks turned slightly red as he crawled out of the cave. Then waving his claws above his head, he began. I'm so sorry. Where are my manners? It's just been so long since I've had company. He raised his head, exposing an ochre-colored belly with an occasional pink band. I am Gimmelgas of the Gaster clan, although I'm not sure it's a clan anymore. Can you have a clan of one? Wide-eyed and mouth agape, Tick and Clover shrugged their shoulders. I apologize again. I know I'm rambling. I can't. Gimmelgas cost himself and shook his head to huge head. May I ask your names? There was a notable pause before Tick awoke from her stupor. I am Princess Campanusa, noblest of Azul. The dragon bowed his head. I am honored. Clover continued to stare until Tick stuck an elbow in his ribs. Oh, he groaned. I am Sir Edmund Hilary Slaughterblossom, sometimes known as Clover. Bending his head again, the dragon replied, your humble servant. He paused for a moment, then nodded his head towards him. I wonder if you would mind lowering your swords. He raised both his paws and retracted his talons. Nothing personal, it's just my family has never handled drawn steel well. Clover looked at Tick. She nodded and both lowered swords, but they did not sheath them. Tick took a step forward. How do you speak our language so well? Ah, well, that's a story. You see, all our dragon names, indeed, all our words are the G, or a Gur, again, you get the idea. As a courtesy, when we met humans, we would always identify ourselves and say hello. For example, I would say, Gimmelgas, Ralph. Ralph being our word for hello. He waved the ball. Tick brushed aside. A small puff of smoke. I'm not sure I followed. Yes, continued the dragon. Well, that was the problem. You humans thought we were growling and immediately responded with cold steel. He showed a brief, not a pleasant way to make friends. Eventually, some of us got together and decided to learn their language in hopes of changing things. He shook his head. It didn't work too well. But I came to be quite a linguist. Even wrote some poetry. Plover spoke up. Well, I must admit, you learned it well. Thank you, sir. It really wasn't that hard except for some verb tenses. I mean, I am, you are, he is. Where did that come from? Neither replied. I'm rambling again, now aren't I? A cool breeze picked up as the night fog rose off the pond. Tick shivered involuntarily. The dragon noticed and asked, would you like to come to the cave and warm up? Sir Edmund, you could get some firewood and I can get it started. Both Tick and Plover's eyes widened. The dragon raised his arms. I didn't mean anything like that, I can assure you. I do not care anything for human need. Never have. I mean, I never tried it, but my uncle told me it was too sweet. Two comrades took a step back. Plus, continued the dragon, I am so old, it doesn't take much to fill me up. Well, I've just had 3 rats and a sparrow today, and I feel like I'm going to throw up. The mist began to fall. Tick looked at Plover. Why do you think, she asked. What do you think? Plover stared at the sky and immediately met with a larger throat right inside. Rubbing it, he said, well, if you're going to fry us, I could have done it by now. Plus, that gosfat shank I've got may taste better. It's cooked. He smiled and lashed up at the dragon's large snout, even if it's a bit charred. He took Tick's hand. I'll be okay, she replied. Plover gave her hand a squeeze, then left to pick up the wood. The cave's entrance always a key sight. That's the end of the chapter. So that's where. And the third book, like I said, is going to be The Twin Princesses. Plover and Tick are gone so long, a lot of people think they have disappeared and have been taken away to what's called the 7 Islands. And the 2 girls are sent to look for them. And they get captured, and then we go from there. And then Plover and Tick decide to try and help. And so that's going to be book 3 as we get into that. Which is called, again, it's going to be called The Twin Princesses. So that's how I did it. Now, since they're here, one of the reasons I did it again was to have something for the girls to read sometime before too long. And they read so much that I'm kind of down the list, but they read like lots. They read tough books. I mean, they are getting all the way past some of this other stuff. But I hope that they will like this one too. I really do. So any questions or thoughts? Anything else anybody wants to do? Yes.
Do you have any advice for inspiring writers on the writing process or on getting published?
I'll start with the second one first. Getting published is a weird situation. And again, it's, to go back to my experience, was that a lot of them want to, especially as a small book publisher, they want to have 3 or 4 books because they figure they're not going to make much money off the first one and maybe not much on the second. They just got to build up something of that nature. They're self-publishing, and did you?
I self-published.
You self-published?
Yeah,
Did
I'm
you?
so old, I didn't think I had time to
And did you do yours self-published?
Yeah, but I was the only one that bought it.
Okay. So I think that's a possibility. I think going to classes like Alan and I did, and talking to some of the teachers that CCCC had, kind of gave us some input or thoughts about that, how it went about, and also about how difficult it was. And of course, one of the things that a lot of the classes CCCC did is that there's a lot more magazines and things like that, so you may want to try sending something off to there and getting them to see if they want to publish it. Again, there's enough of those that you can have an award even though nobody's ever heard of the magazine, and you can put it across your books or whatever it might be. So I think that's part of it. I think, again, the classes at CCCC helped. I think there are some books out there that will help you and get you involved in the publishing process. They tend to be somewhat technical, but every now and then I'll see two folks that put you in their book. What were their names?
Oh, the Levines.
The Levines.
Yeah.
And they wrote a book about how to get published, or what to do to publish yourself. I mean, they had several parts of it. And that was one that I used on a couple of occasions.
Jim and Joyce.
Jim and Joyce Levine. And so there are things out there that might help. I would say, since we got some of y'all here, that going to the library and saying, what kind of books, if you have not decided you want to do children's books, or if you've not decided you want to do battle books or mysteries or what, in other words, you're just kind of trying to think, I think these folks would say, this is okay, people are reading detective novels right now, or you don't want to do another ghost story. That's just not, people aren't reading ghost stories anymore, unless it's really, really scary or something like that. So, so I think that the library is a good place to go and see what their thoughts are. I'm not advocating horrors, but again, they're going to have a real notion as to what kind of books are, I don't know if selling is the right word, but that they're processing. They've seen a lot of libraries pick up on. And that's worth knowing. If you haven't picked a topic for yourself. Now again, if you've picked a topic, then I think that you need to probably, like, again, we'll go back to ghosts or horror stories, something like that, you probably need to read 8 or 10 of what consider the best of those kinds of stories and see what they do. If it's a children's book, you need to read, several children's books to see that sort of situation. So I think, again, that's another factor that you can do to kind of figure out what it is you want to do.
Steve, are you a member of the North Carolina Writers Network?
Yeah, although I've kind of drifted away, or they haven't been. Here's the other thing that happened. When my first book came out, it was in 2017. And you know this too. The publishing and the Writers Network and everything just kind of, the classes up at CCCC, 2018, 2019, they kind of just shut down. And they're starting to come back. I've started reading them a couple of times now, but there for a while, I didn't see, I'd say one thing about your subscription is coming up, for the year, and they would not do much else. Now, they put stuff on Facebook when I had them on Facebook, and that would be helpful. So, and you, I guess, are a member?
Yes, and there is a group, the Chatham-Lee County Writers Morning Out.
Yes, I have been a part of that on occasion.
Yeah, right.
It's a bit more of a drive for me, but I have gone up there. That, again, any of you consider that?
Zooming now.
It's what?
Zoom.
Yeah, it's zooming. Again, we go back to what's happened as far as conditions are concerned. But
And they offer a class, usually as one of the meetings during the month.
I've seen that, and you can do it online.
Oh, well, it happens as part of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Last time we were learning about brevity.
Okay. I think I saw that one. I did not look at it, but I think I saw that subject. So, yeah, she had you write very, very short pieces, or
Yeah, and then you present them, and or you send them in, and she'll discuss them.
yeah.
And she gives a whole round. Let's see who I forgot who. It was a Maxine.
Yes. Oh,
I
gosh.
don't remember the rest of her name.
I know. Yeah.
Anyway, she was pretty dynamic, and it was quite informative. And all I have to do is turn on my computer.
And occasionally, again, although they tend to specialize, North Carolina Writers Network will do that, and have somebody who's speaking to a specific point, and you can get on Zoom.
Well, the Writers Morning Out is a subset of the North Carolina Writers Network.
Right. And another one I'm in, yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna ask on your ghost print, or your princess books, did you have like a focus group as you wrote? Did you have folks read what you had written, or, I mean, I guess you have an editor?
Yes, I had a very good editor from Warren Publishing, who were in Charlotte, now they're in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And she was very, very good. I highly recommend her. And again, they tend to look for books like I've done. And they're small. I think they have like 5 employees, but that's, go back to kind of what I was saying, that's sort of, for small book companies, they're not, you know, there's not that
But
many
like
folks.
as you were writing it, since it's about a young lady, did you have princesses read it as you were writing it to say, yes, she would do this, no, she wouldn't do this, or was this just all out of your?
I think because of where I was sticking it back in the 1700s or something like that. That's a good point, but I think I was going the historical kind of things.
So they'll be your biggest critics when they get to it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember your European history classes very well. Were there any particular historical figures or events that you adapted into your characters or the narrative?
Not so much in the children's books. I wrote a book called Young Hickory, which has a lot of that in there. That follows a soldier in World War II who got injured. He was in the was it the 65th or 66th Division? Anyway, one of those divisions that had this terrible event happen as they were preparing for D-Day. They got hit by a couple of German submarines, and several of their boats went down, and my hero broke his arms, and therefore he didn't get to go with them. Well, actually, that division kind of just got pushed aside, and so he ended up in the 30th, which is North Carolina and Tennessee's division, which is kind of why I did it, because they were very much a part of that. So yeah, it's a different kind of situation, but at least as far as that one is concerned, it was because I wanted to talk about this division and the fact that it was an amazing group that was chosen as the best division best infantry division in Western Europe. But because it was from North Carolina and Tennessee, the 1st Infantry and the 4th Infantry and some of those divisions said, we don't want that to be published. I mean, it took forever for anybody to really know that, you know, a National Guard division was the best division in Europe. But so it was, to go back to what you said, yeah, the history allowed me to pursue that, and the more I did that, I got interested in it, and that led to that story. So,
Can you describe a typical writing day for you?
Not recently, because again, this COVID pulse has kind of got me out. But when I had it, it was I would try to write a chapter a day for something like this, and then look over it, make sure it meshed up with the other chapters. If I had written something like for book 3 on the other sorts of stuff, I would have to do some things and do some research and things of that nature. But yeah,
You start at 9 and work until 5, or what?
no, I was not good at that. It was usually 9 at night till about midnight. So
And you're writing by hand or using your
using the computer, yeah, yeah. If you ever saw my handwriting, you'll know what happens. Yes, ma'am.
Just the thought of writing fiction is just beyond me. Do you have a character and then build the story around that character, or do you have like a storyline and find characters that can fit into that? As
Yeah.
I'm thinking about your princess books.
In the Princess book, yes, I think that I decided that I wanted to have the potential. Well, part of it again was that the publisher said we wanted more than one book. Was to have several princesses, even though some of them are barely in the story at all. So I did 7 princesses, supposedly it'd be lucky and that sort of stuff like that. And then the other thing was kind of go back to my history background that he was asking about. I think I wondered what would have happened if it was more like the Rockies. And what would have happened if it was more like the Vikings who came down and settled this, and the English and the French and others didn't come over nearly as often or weren't quite as big. How would that play out? And again, having the mountains like the Rockies instead of the Appalachians would have kept them kind of on the coast. So in the process of creating this, I had a historical idea about something in the 1700s, but I had it kind of, making it different. I'll give you a good example of that. And there's a battle at the end of this one. And I decided, I have this guy who is just really, he's called Shimmelkopf, which isn't his real name, but that's what he goes by, who claims that he can make rifles were just starting happening. He said, I can make you a circular one. And you'd have 6 or 8, Now that didn't happen, to the best of my knowledge, in the 1700s, but I had him do that. Now in the battle, every time he does it, it starts knocking the machine off the ground, and it doesn't work nearly as well as he thinks it's going to. But it'll allow me to come in with that sort of help to a battlefield situation. So yeah, the history does play a role in it. But again, like I said, it was also trying to make it, which romance, etc., growing up, what kind of things you'll face, what kind of things you're going to do, how that differs from back then when all the arranged marriages and things of that nature, instead of being allowed to marry the person you fall in love with, that kind of thing I went into. And then I think the other thing was that I really wanted to get dragons, and I mentioned it, but I talk about it in this. And Black Panthers. Oh, and in book 1, now again, the only reason I can do this is because I brought the Rockies over in there, so therefore there might be something, although I know some people believe this. I have a couple of Yeti. I have some snowmen. I'm not going to say it. They don't exist. So, but they help with the fiction. So, other things. Yeah.
How much did you draw on for the personalities of your characters from people or composite of personalities you know or knew? Or did you do that much?
I don't think I did it that much. I'm sure that I did it without realizing it somewhat. But yeah, there's a character in these books called Ralph, who's just a real pain. And I think I had a person I knew in junior high who was kind of like that person. You just, oh Lord, they're coming, dive into another room or something like that. So, and Ralph is supposed to marry one of the daughters, and that none of them are happy about that. Anything? I want to thank y'all for listening and laughing on occasion. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I will be glad if you want to buy one. They're back there, and I'll be glad to sign if you want me to. And like I said, I have my pens, what I do with it. Here they are.